Please welcome to the Tam Fam, Grace Byers. Grace, so good to have you on.
Yes. So great to be here. Oh my gosh. I am just a huge fan of yours and you look stunning and I absolutely am in love with this theme.
Oh, yay. Well, you know what? It's inspired by your book and by your journey and some of the people that we'll talk with throughout this show who are not famous names, but their stories will resonate. I love the fact that so much of your message about being enough and believing in oneself is directed at kids, because a lot of what we experience, we know as adults, the trauma, the insecurities, it all likely started early in life. And that includes your journey.
Absolutely. And, it wasn't until I started really doing that introspective work and working on the healing for myself till I realized how much of this stuff happened from the time I was young. You said it earlier, but I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that I was biracial and that I was multicultural, still am, but I was growing up and, also just being in a household that just felt very, very different compared to, all the other kids that I went to school with. And so I think as a kid, one of the things that you don't want to be, the thing that you don't want to be the most is different. And then I think that when you grow up, you realize, oh my gosh, I really am like no other person. And that is actually your superpower and not, a liability.
Your mother, as you mentioned, is Afro-Caribbean from the Cayman Islands, one of the most beautiful places on the planet. Your dad was born in Pennsylvania. Growing up, or even now, is it harder to explain being multicultural and biracial than that both parents are deaf? Which one do you find that people are leaning in most on?
The deaf culture for sure. But I think the biggest shock for me was to see other children have parents who were hearing. And so when I would go to school and other parents would come about, my mom would come, I grew up in a deaf household. That's what I knew. And so when my mom would speak or when she would sign, that would be something that would be very strange for the kids to be able to comprehend, of course, because they're kids. And so this was new for them. And so, I think there's still more work to be done around accepting the differences that are around you. And so, as a kid, I was accosted a lot for how my mom sounded, for how she communicated. And I just didn't have those answers as a child. I was just like, I don't know. I don't know why she sounds like that. That's just my mom. And so what seemed very normal to me, I quickly found out was actually really very different for every other person in my class. And so it made me feel a little ostracized in those moments.
I have to tell you, when I was reading that part of your story, that to me resonated in this. Follow me here. I had a single mom, and I remember going to school and other people having their mom and dad, and I had just my mom. Now, my mother is everything in the world to me, but I don't think I ever even told her. There were a couple of times, I think in third grade, where I was embarrassed that I had a single mom. Right. And that somehow I was othered because of it, or something was wrong with our family. And that can impact how you see yourself and your journey. You wrote on Instagram something that was so touching. You said, for years, I hid my shine and coerced myself out of my worth, making myself small or inconsequential seemed to cause less waves. And I didn't want a ripple effect, while the world accosted me to interpret my mixed heritage for the purpose of comfort labeling. I acquiesced. The biggest part of that, though, is when you talked about shrinking yourself down, something that I, too, even though we're in these big careers that people say, I did the same. In childhood, I used humor, and I found myself later in life doing that same kind of thing to shrink yourself down so that others wouldn't feel bad, but you were hiding your true self.
Absolutely. And if you ever go to the Cayman Islands or to the Caribbean, you will see a melting pot of people. And you will actually see people who are really fair skinned with freckles and light colored eyes and even like dirty blonde hair. And neither of their parents are white. And so although there is colorism and although there is racism in the Caribbean, we tend to try to bond in a more cultural way. So when coming to America, I had to learn how to kind of code switch a little bit. And so even coming here, a lot of people, they couldn't place me because I was racially ambiguous, and they wanted to label me very quickly and say, well, what are you? That was number one question I got a lot. What are you? And so it was really hard for me because it's like, I'm like, well, my dad's white, my mom's black, I'm American, but I'm also Caymanian. I'm hearing, but I'm also part of a deaf culture. And so there were all these things that I just couldn't answer the question in a pun intended, in a black and white way, right? And so I realized that when people couldn't understand all those mixes and wanted me to give them a definitive answer, that's when I understood that, okay, the labeling is really important for a lot of people, not just in America, but in worldwide. And I think that has a lot to do with how people want to be able to perceive you and understand you. And of course, this is general, not everyone is like this, but this was the main part of my experience. Like, wow, like, I didn't feel black enough in some circumstances, and even in the industry, right? So it's like, if I'm going out for a role for an African American, 9 times out of 10, I'm not the one who's cast, And so just kind of wandering a little bit in the world, trying to find a place that I belonged, or that I felt fully accepted me, felt a little difficult first coming to America. And so, to not feel so different, to not feel so, unable to be labeled, I tried to just kind of maintain a persona of don't move, don't speak too loudly, don't move too strongly, because then you're going to bring more attention to yourself, and then people are going to want to ask questions, and you can't really define yourself in a way. And so what do you say? What do you do? So just try to keep the waters still.
Grace, we were talking about your books directed at helping to build the self-esteem of children, and how so much of who we are as an adult, of course, is based on what's happened to us as a child. In accepting that you were enough, your background and your family, I know that you had to look at moments in your past, including a really horrifying memory as a child when you were in school. You said you were finally invited to a swim party with the cool kids, and you'd worked up the confidence to say, yes, you wanted to go. And then something terrifying happened after.
Yeah, so I didn't realize how much I was being bullied and how much I was being ostracized as a child. I just knew that I would just kind of spend recesses by myself and, just eat alone, and, didn't really know where to go, what to do. And I was just like, okay, well, I guess they just, they just they want to play with me. It's okay, that whole thing. And so I do remember there was one time where we were at school and it was in a lunch line. And a girl in our class was having a birthday pool party. And so everyone in class had been invited. And I heard one of the popular girls up ahead in line just like swing around. And she was like, oh, Grace, are you going to the birthday party? And I just felt so special in that moment. I was like, oh my gosh, like one of the most popular girls in school is asking me if I'm going to this birthday party. And I was like, yeah, I'm going. And even though it was a pool party and I knew that I couldn't swim, an island girl that couldn't swim, yes, that was me. I was just like, I did not want to be left out. And I was finally invited. So despite not being able to swim, I was just like, I'll make it work. Like, I'll just figure it out. I just want to go. And so she was like, are you going? I was like, yeah, I'm going. And she was like, okay, great. And she turns around, and for a quick second, I just felt like on top of the world. And then, of course, I think children are still learning the concepts of secrets and whispering. And so she said loud enough, and I heard her, where she said to the other girls, great, now we can drown her. And I just could not believe that I had heard it, and that she had said it, and that, that this felt like, it felt like otherworldly, because it was almost like, okay, I guess this is my life. I guess this is normalcy. And so I had to act and pretend like this was normal behavior, and I still went to the birthday party, and best believe I did not get in that pool. I surely did not. I was like, nope. And so you learn how to survive, you're just like, you
Yeah.
learn how to survive and how to absorb that impact. And I think that only magnifies as you get to being an adult. And that really manifested for me because of all the criticism and all of the ostracizing. I felt like in order to survive in the world, I needed to avoid criticism, which meant that I needed to show up as the most perfect version of myself so that no one would have anything negative to say about me.
Well, I think you hit on something very important, though. You talked about you learn to survive, but what you learn in your adulthood is how to thrive, which is why you've been on these incredible casts and you've had this phenomenal career, even after it took a lot of work and struggle to get to where you are, including the ramen noodle nights and the peanut butter and waiting on the unemployment check. You didn't just survive, you learned to thrive by recognizing that you're good enough.
Absolutely. This experience with Harlem is truly a 360-degree moment because when I was a struggling actor in New York, there were times that I literally had to, there was once that I sold I had a very small bedroom. I didn't even have a closet in it. I only had a dresser. It was so small. And I sold it on Craigslist at the time for $50 just to make some money for food. And I remember the woman who bought it for $60. And I was like, I'm sorry, I don't have any change for you. And she was like, just keep the 10. And I was like, oh my gosh. And with that money, I bought, bread and peanut butter and jelly and ramen noodles so that I could have 2 meals a day for a week, you know what I mean? And also use that money to try to, get to the subway, buy a subway ticket. Like I had to really make that stretch for a week. And these are the stories that a lot of people, we don't know each other's stories. And so that's why I think it's so important to have grace and compassion and space for people to be exactly who they are.
Absolutely. You mentioned Harlem, which is such a great show, and you play Quinn, a woman from a privileged background and whose mother is played by Jasmine Guy. As I mentioned, but what I did not know, and I just read this, your character was inspired by Betty White's character Rose on The Golden Girls, and knowing that we've lost this icon in comedy and in the acting world, and she was part of the inspiration. That's so interesting to me.
So she wasn't a part of the inspiration as far as the writing, but when I was looking at the dynamic with the four girls, I just so happened to, at the same point in time, I was binging The Golden Girls. And so I'd never seen The Golden Girls, and here I am about to play a part with like four women. And so I was like, this is one of the most iconic ones, in addition to all of the ones that we do have that have come before us, which I've seen, but I had not seen The Golden Girls. So as I was watching The Golden Girls, I just kept saying to myself, oh my goodness, Quinn reminds me so much of Rose. She reminds me so much of Betty White's character, And although there are very stark differences, there is an innocence and there's a naivety to both of these characters. And so I remember watching Betty White and just going, oh my gosh, like I'm just so bowled over by the things that she does, and just artistically her talent as she was doing, all of the Golden Girls. And so it really hit me hard because I still watch the Golden Girls every night just because I love it now. And I feel like these women are my friends. And so I was really kind of loving the fact that Betty White was still alive, and I couldn't wait for her to turn 100. And I was like, it'd be so great to meet her one day, And so, to know that she recently passed was just like a big heartbreak for me. And so I'm just like telling her thank you for all the ways in which she inspires me as an artist too.